Well, to begin our interesting discussion, let's bring in CNA correspondent Saksit Sasombot in Bangkok, as well as Professor Ian Hall, International Relations at Griffith University. Well, thank you both for joining us this evening. First to you, Professor Hall, I want to talk about Bhutan's unique approach to foreign policy, focusing on mindfulness balance. What does it reveal about the possibilities as well as the limitations when negotiating with neighbouring superpowers, India and China?
Well, Bhutan is in a very unusual position, as the report there said, stuck between these two very populous, very powerful countries with large militaries. But Bhutan is unusual in terms of its South Asian neighbours because it's one of the few countries that doesn't have a sizable army. It doesn't really have any military power at all. It doesn't have a lot of economic leverage either. So that sets it back. The only approach that it can take is a diplomatic one, a political one. It has to negotiate very carefully, very patiently, and it can't really bring any power to bear on these negotiations. So that approach of mindfulness and so on, those things are really forced upon Bhutan by its lack of leverage.
Saksit, Professor Hall there talked about, Bhutan being in a very unique position. They don't have military, no army, very small, basically a small country. So help us understand, though, how is Bhutan's balancing of India-China relations, for instance, compare with neighbours like Nepal and Bangladesh, who are also sort of caught in the same geopolitical dynamics?
Well, as Professor Hall just pointed out there, it seems on the surface at least that Bhutan doesn't have a lot to offer and doesn't have a lot of leverage against the other countries as well. I mean, the diplomatic reach, as we have pointed out in the story that we've seen beforehand, they don't have many diplomatic relations with a lot of countries. They don't have many embassies around the world as well. If we look here in the Asia Pacific, for example, there are only two countries where Bhutan has an embassy, one in Australia and one here in Thailand. That is the entirety of the whole Pacific covered there already. So you could think that what actually tools does have actually Bhutan in the diplomatic toolbox, so to speak, and that is the diplomacy, and that it is the human to human connection that they have seen here. While we were in Bhutan, we were coinciding with the visit of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the thing is that a week before that, the Bhutanese Prime Minister Charan Topgay was in India as well to visit there, also underlining the long historical the ties that these two countries have, that they are looking at each other there. So compared to other countries, they don't have a lot of leverage, but they can exercise some leverage there, as we have been hearing in the report, that maybe the China card to play against India and the India card against China in order to get some sort of advantages, or get at least in an advantage negotiating position, be it for diplomatic reasons or be it for economic reasons. But, Professor Hall, if I can turn my question to you. When I was there in Bhutan, when we were talking to stakeholders and people from the government, and when we were broaching the topic about its geopolitical position, when we were talking about Bhutan's place in the world between China and India, they seem to be very careful. They seem to be very guarded on that topic. So, Professor Hall, if you can help us understand what's on their mind, what are they not telling us?
I think they are very guarded about their position. I think we're kind of posing here the idea that Bhutan sits between these two countries in an equal relationship, but its relationship with India is much more intense. It obviously has a treaty foundation as well, and its relationship with China is much more attenuated. Bhutan is very concerned about the possibility that India would become concerned about Bhutan moving towards China in some way, and very concerned that India could use some of the power that it has over Bhutan in order to coerce it in some way. So in your report there, you mentioned the hydropower, for example. Hydropower is very important to Bhutan. Those hydroelectric projects could bring in huge amounts of revenue into Bhutan, and India could, in some sense, potentially put a question mark over those projects. That would make things very difficult for Bhutan. At the same time, though, Bhutan is quietly negotiating with China over the border, the contested border, both in the Doklam area, but also to the north, where there's been some concerns raised that China is encroaching into Bhutanese territory, that is building these small strategic villages in the north. Bhutan obviously can't do very much about that militarily, and nor can India really assist in that area either, because it's a long way away from India's major bases and India's military presence in the south. So Bhutan has to walk this incredibly fine line between not offending India in any way, knowing that India occasionally can be coercive towards some of its neighbors. And at the same time, it does need to address some of these issues to the north with China because the reality on the ground is being changed by the Chinese.
And Professor Hall, just tagging on from what you're talking about, China's border talks with Bhutan, you've mentioned they've been quietly negotiating on the side. Help us understand, are there any risks, I mean, if they do reach a deal, and are they any closer to reaching a deal? And also, could it spark new tensions with India, though, which happens to have a defense agreement with Bhutan?
Well, yes, it could spark some tensions with India as well. I don't think that India wants to see Bhutan entangled in a long-running, difficult, costly kind of tussle with China at any point along its borders. But at the same time, too, India will be concerned that China may require Bhutan to enter into agreements with China that would not be in India's interests as well. So, as I say, this is a very difficult line for Bhutan to walk. And unfortunately, time's not really in its favor either. As I suggested, there's some concern in the West and in India as well that China's changing the situation on the ground as we speak. And so as that status quo is being changed by the Chinese, Bhutan is then losing ground step by step, and is being increasingly forced into a position where it needs to negotiate seriously with China and conclude some kind of agreement.
Now, Professor Hall, could you just elaborate on that? What do you mean China is sort of changing the situation on the ground?
So there's been some reporting in the last few years that satellite imagery is showing that the Chinese have moved into areas that Bhutan may consider its own, that it's building some infrastructure in those areas. So we know about the infrastructure building around the Doklam area. There was the confrontation in 2017 over the building of a road. But there's been some discussion as well that up to the north of Bhutan, there's some activity there. It may just be road building, it may be demarcation of the border, but there's been some concern in the Western media as well that there have been some villages that have been built there, or there have been some housing that's been built in those areas. And certainly talking to Bhutanese sources, as I have done in the last few years, there's concern that's been raised there on that side that, as I say, that the reality on the ground is being changed by the Chinese.
Sure. Well, thanks for clarifying that, Professor. Saksit, I want to talk about the hydropower sector, because I know that India is Bhutan's primary power export market, and they've got a significant presence in this particular sector. But do you see China making inroads, maybe when it comes to investments or fundings in Bhutan?
Before we get to that answer, I want to pick up what Professor Hall said. It was interesting that to see the different reactions and to see the different responses when those satellite imagery were showing showcasing the infrastructures that China were accused of to have built on Bhutan territory. And you can see the different reactions to that. You had not only a lot of reporting in Western media, but you also had a lot of reporting in Indian media, as you can imagine as well. But then strikingly on the opposite side as well, that the Bhutan government at that time has basically dismissed these developments as nothing. But then, you know, as Professor Hall has said, that the reality on the ground is being changed, and the real actual perception by the Bhutanese is a different one that they are expressing publicly. Now, towards about the economic investment opportunities, not only for India, but also for China. It is a country that economically it doesn't have a big portfolio, but it has a few stands out there. Hydroelectricity, of course, one of them is one standout, especially because of Bhutan's green credentials that it has as a carbon negative country. Most of its, if nearly all of its energy sources come from hydroelectricity, even though that is being endangered by climate change, that could affect that. But then also there is what we have mentioned in the piece, the need to change and to make a wholesale change of the Bhutanese economy, not only to stem against the brain drain and the youth unemployment that they have, but also to create new opportunity for foreign direct investment. The showcase piece here is the Galefu Mindfulness City at the border to India, where it's obvious that India could have a foot in there as well, but it could also attract other people, including the Chinese. That is at least what people have told us there, that they are saying that we are welcoming everybody, we are welcoming every investor that is subscribing to our philosophy of this city of the future, and that could include the Chinese as well, but they will be vetted. Professor Hall, is there anything else that where you can see possible investment opportunities for China or anybody else there?
Look, I think that's been an excellent summary of Bhutan's situation. I think these kind of mindfulness projects, the smart city projects as well, this kind of projects should attract some investment, but its proximity to India, I think, means that the bulk of the investment is going to come in from India as well. There may be some concern and some interest from the Chinese in terms of investing in Bhutan's tourism industry. But of course, that itself is a vexed issue for Bhutan. There's a huge amount of demand to travel into Bhutan, but Bhutan has been very careful about limiting its tourist numbers so as to maintain quality of life for its own people and to maintain the tourist experience as well. So areas like hotels and hospitality and so on may be one area for investment, but I don't anticipate that we're going to see very significant investment because we've seen in the last few years investment in Chinese investment across this region slowing down, including, say, in Nepal, where there was quite a lot of Chinese investment a few years ago, but it seems as though that is tapering off a little.
Right, and Saksit, I believe that you'll be taking us on a journey to Bhutan tomorrow and for the rest of the week as well. Can you just very quickly give us a sneak preview of what we can expect?
Very much. I mean, Bhutan is a country that doesn't appear very often in international headlines. And since we had the opportunity to be there, we are, of course, making the best of it. Of course, as we mentioned, the showcase piece here, that they are trying to show the world that they are changing their economy, that they are pitching their vision of a 21st century utopia, a 21st Shangri-La, if you want, with that Galefu Mindfulness City. We were one of the first international news teams to actually go on the ground to look at the area that will maybe one day become this utopia, and also ask the people, what is the vision of the future? How is the country going to change? What is their plan for that? And also, is this something that is too good to be true? Of course, we will be also looking at other aspects of Bhutan as well, tourism, for example, and also its green credentials, its environmental impact, and its efforts to protect them. So basically, the best thing is just follow all week, or hear us on CNA. We will have a CNA correspondent special about Bhutan on Wednesday evening. And and also to tease, we will also have an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister sharing Talk Bay on Friday as well.
I'm looking forward to all of that. Thank you so very much, Saksit Sahasombat, speaking to us from Bangkok, as well as Professor Ian Hall, International Relations at Griffith University. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts.